What do you think? Shall we begin, Leanne?
Let's do it.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. My name is Leanne. I am a white woman with long blonde hair and brown eyes. I'm wearing a gray crew neck sweater, and I'm sitting in a living room with white walls behind me. I'm currently on Muskogee and Cherokee Indigenous tribal land. This meeting will be recorded, and a recording with closed captions will be made available afterward on Nita's new website.
Yeah, go to my new website.
Welcome to Breaking Bread with Nita Little. Our time will be structured as follows. There will be a welcome and a what to expect, which is happening now. There will be a 20-minute talk from Nita, and then there will be 20 minutes of discussion, and then we'll just speak briefly about what's coming up next for Nita so that you feel super in the know. And without further ado, Nita Little.
Okay, let's start right away. I'm going to encourage everyone, please, to speak up at any time. If you don't understand something, or let's let this be casual. It may look formal because I put together some slides, but that is only to be kind of mutually, that is to help people when I'm dealing with other thinkers, when I've done research, and maybe you want to be able to read along as hear me. I want to say something about myself here. I am on Snohomish lands up in Seattle. So the Salish tribes of the Salish Sea lived on this land that I'm now speaking from. I am also a white woman, but with gray hair that once upon a time was dark. And I am speaking to you from this kind of interesting setting with a plant behind me. So I wanted something living with me as I speak to you. Leanne, if we can start the slides, I will be happy about that, please. Great, and this is Breaking Bread, and I meant to correct this, but it's a talk and conversation among movers on subjects, breaking bread generally, how I'm forming this whole thing, on subjects of embodiment, relational intelligence, and somatic communication. And this talk, I'd have to say, is really quite, let's go to the next, very much about relational practices with the more than human world that we also are. The more than human, I think that term really initiated with David Abrams. And I throughout my research for this, kept looking for my David Abrams, and I could never find him in my shelves. So somehow he's wandered away from my bookshelves. And I did not go online to find more about him. But if you are interested in the more than human, you might look for him and his writings. The more than human world that theorizes and that humans are not the most significant thing on this planet, that we in fact live on a planet of many different compositions of being, and that all are significant. So that's the starting point, and why I use that term, the more than human world. And I say it begins within because I work with attention and the embodiment of attention. And that is what we're going to be doing. Next slide. Oh my goodness, this is not working right. Because that little thing that's right in the middle there, hidden, is in bright yellow on my slides. So people too are made of non-people elements. I so I wanted to start with Thich Nhat Hanh. I don't sleep so well. And so one of the things that I do is I listen to books on tape. And for quite some time, I've been listening to Thich Nhat Hanh. And I set it down to really slow. So I'm listening at like the speed of 6, beneath 1, which is, or 10, which is a full speed. So I'm going really slow when I'm listening. Anyway, so in one of the books called Pieces Every Step, he speaks about paper being composed of non-paper elements. He says you can see the cloud. He asks, actually, can you see the cloud in a piece of paper? Can you see the tree? And when you start to think on this level, indeed, everything you can see is composed of bits of which that which you are looking at is not. So take a moment right now, if you will, and just run your eyes around your room and understand that everything that you're looking at is composed of what it is not. It's a fun exercise, a fun practice. And looking at this way, we see, of course, the people too are made of non-people elements. Let's, Leanne, I think you and I need a non-spoken signal to move slides or something. So if you would go to the next slide, let's see if it's okay. Goodness. Okay, so people too are composed of non-people elements. I mean, even if you think about our genomes, a genome has 4 chemical bases: adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine. None of that is human. And even if you think 60% of us is water, is water human? So whether we're looking scientifically or through the eyes of one that understands how intertwined, entangled we are in one another, what we come up with is that humans are made of non-people too, are made of non-people elements. So we would not survive without our microbiome, biome, in fact, and it goes on and on. So to do that work, to experience this, however, we have to shift the scale of our attention in order to feel all those non-human bits, in order to maybe even commune with those non-human bits. And so this is our beginning. This is where we begin this talk. To do this work, you kind of have to allow yourself to be a multiplicity of being and stop the insistence of experiencing selfhood as a singularity, so that if I ask you who you are, you might turn to self as a multiplicity rather than self as a singularity. And I'm not speaking on the scale of gender when I say that. I'm speaking on the scale of the multiplicity of being that is our really very elemental self. It requires this changing of the scale of experience. And of course, we don't think this way in our everyday lives, but if we did, how might this world be enriched by our understanding that where we stand now, there stands a non-human? So this work is meant to knit our human presence more neatly within or as, and I'm really very specific with that preposition, as this world we also are. It is meant to work against human exceptionalism and begin the job of taking down the barriers that separate us experientially from the non-human world we also always are. And on we go. So this is a metaphysical goal. I mean by that, that we have to exceed the notions of our cultural conditioning to achieve this goal. We have we have to enter an uncomfortable realm that moves against the objective notions of science, the separation of a purely objective reality. I'm trying to think of what Donna Haraway calls that scientific objective. He calls it something like the God talk, God something. And it's quite funny, that notion that we can study anything from an idea of being nowhere, because the notion that we are situated is important. As a feminist, it's a particularly feminist perspective to say that what we can know, we know because we are situated somewhere, but that is also excluding other ways of knowing. So the issue with the science, this objective reality of science, is that it eliminates the immaterial that is always present alongside the material. And in order to experience, we have to be willing. In order to communicate, we have to be willing to admit the immaterial within our experience and not set it or squeeze it aside, but invite that in, that experience in. In 1979, Ken Wilber wrote a book about boundaries. It was called No Boundary. It's not a particularly good book, I have to say, but the notion that he's dealing with is really good. Wilber is a philosophical thinker who is problematic within the academy, in part because he's a Buddhist that blends spirituality and scientific and philosophical thought in his reasoning. He doesn't write for the academy, so he doesn't really care. And he says some interesting things. And in this particular text, he says something quite fun. The ultimate metaphysical secret, if we dare state it so simply, is that there are no boundaries in the universe. Boundaries are illusions. Products not of reality, but of the way we map and edit reality. And while it is fine to map out the territory, it is fatal to confuse the two. And I want to take a moment to, in this particular text, which I think I left in the other room, and I wanted to read something to you from it because it's quite clever. One of the things he's speaking about is, and he does it in a way that's annoying. He does it in a way by raising this notion of Adam of Adam and Eve, Adam of the Garden of Eden, and by saying that it was Adam who first started to distinguish this from that. In fact, he was charged with that purpose: distinguish this from that. And that in creating that distinction, in saying, I am not that, I am different than that, a boundary gets shaped, a boundary gets created, a map gets created of that thing that you are not, because only through mapping that thing can you know it. And indeed, thinking is in part making distinctions. That's part of how we understand how to speak. Speaking, I use that word speak. I distinguish speaking from, say, sighing or from breathing. And yet, of course, speaking and breathing are implicated in, I mean, breathing is implicated in that which is spoken. I can't speak without breathing. And yet I will create a distinction in order to think both of those things separately. So, but in doing that, in creating those distinctions, I also create the ground for dissonance, for conflict. And so, and for creating this separation of the human from the world in which we also are. So this no boundary is an important consideration, especially when we're thinking, what could it be to be able to experience self as the world, to understand and experience self as also and always non-human. So there's no way I'm making it through this talk, which is in 20 minutes. And I'm giving myself a little bit more time. Can I ask of you guys, are you okay if I go another 5 or 10 minutes? Good. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Because
Yes.
Okay. Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you so much. Okay, so then so I want to tell you a story, which is maybe 12 years ago, 10 years ago, probably actually 10 years. I was still getting my PhD at UC Davis, and I was in a contact jam, and I had a stomach ache. And Mayfield Brooks, who at the time was called Marianne, was in the studio dancing, and she said, Nita, why don't you come and lay your stomach down here on my stomach? And so I did. And I just let her stomach talk to my stomach, and my stomach talk to her stomach. And my tummy ache went away. And here I show you something that Deborah Hay said, I believe my cellular body knows dialogue in a way that I rarely experience in ordinary life. So the speaking of the cellular, how extraordinary that is. Cellular life having its own intelligence and its own modes of communication, that I can allow myself to be present for and present as, even without it that being a brain-based experience, something that gets known otherwise. Let's go to the next talk as I'm rushing through all of this. There's so much more to say there, and yet in Aboriginal worldviews, and next slide, if you will, there, Liam, thank you. In Aboriginal worldviews, nothing exists outside of a relationship to something else. There are no isolated variables. Every element must be considered in relation to the other elements and the context. Whereas areas of knowledge are integrated, not separated, the relationship between the know and other knowers, places, and senior knowledge keepers is paramount. It facilitates shared memory and sustainable knowledge systems. An observer does not try to be objective, but is integrated within a sentient system that is observing itself. That's from Sand Talk, which how Indigenous thinking can save the world. I think some of you have maybe read this. Some of you maybe will be interested to read this. So discussing what it is to be experiencing as a dancer, and here's where dancers come into this and why we all here are dancers talking about this, is because as dancers, that ability to be a resonant being, meaning to be touched by the world and resonate. To resonate is a tactile expression. Even if we're talking about sound, that resonating is touch. Something is touched, therefore more than just touch happens. More than just touch moves. Touching is moving. And as dancers, that's what we do. And so that ability to resonate as our worlds allows us to understand as non-human forms that we easily can resonate in accord with our worlds if we allow ourselves to be open to it. It's already happening anyway, but wouldn't it be nicer if we were acting in support of it? If we aligned with that which we already know we can do. I went looking for that word resonance and found it so difficult among much of my literature to, and I could not find it in discussions of the non-human, but not that I did an extensive search, but I just want to say how little that experience is used, particularly in everyday living or in understanding the nature of reality. How significant it is for us to stop that boundary which limits resonance, and open it up and allow for the possibility of doing the kind of thinking that does not distinguish this from that, but moves together. It's a context experience. This is a form of responsibility the ability to respond. And when I say response, I'm not simply meaning in the human way of doing something, although that also is important, but in the human way of resonating, of moving as, alongside, with, within, all of those terms that we can open to, especially with respect to the world of objects. Why? Because when we do this, we animate the world. And that seems a critically important thing, practice at this moment in time. Why animate? Because there is information there that we can know in ways that we otherwise can't. Again, now on to Donna Haraway, the next slide. Shaping responsibilities, things and living, what? Yeah, things and living beings can be inside and outside human and non-human bodies at different scales of time and space. So I want to just a little bit take apart responsibility and my orientation towards responsibility. And I should say that term is actually not Donna Haraway's so much as Karen Barad's term. So I turn to her right now in talking about this, and I also turn to my experience as a contact improv dancer. Taking down the barriers means to question what it can be to be a human self. Responsibility. In this moment, our identity is no longer bound in its size, its shape, its experiential scale or number. This is essentially the effect of dance enabling our body minds to yield to more potential and less fear. As Barad describes, in an important sense, in a breathtakingly intimate sense, touching, you can go to the next slide, which should be Barad. No, it isn't. So I will read this, and don't read that, guys, otherwise you'll get confused. In a breathtakingly intimate sense, touching, sensing is what matter does, or rather, what matter is. Matter is condensations of responsibility. Touching is a matter of response. Each of us is constituted in responsibility. Each of us is constituted as responsible for the other as the other. Barad calls us to a new sensibility and a new ethics in this. This is an ethics of touching that entails an infinite alterity. Quotes. In which oneself is inseparably entangled in relations of obligation to the other self. You also are. She notes that even the smallest bits of matter are an unfathomable multitude. This way of understanding matter incites a sense of respect for all parts and their interactions. It is a move that values every scale and position, while it complicates the notions of individuated forms. Putting her work into practice as a politics begins with sensing the very small, even the not yet material that impacts actions of the very large and the now it matters. Okay, that's as much of Bharat as I'm going to go. It goes much further. Ecology and motion. Engaging the body-mind as a synergetic system that coextends with its spatial environment requires attentional practices that enhance physical awareness, peripheral intelligence, meaning that which is on the outside. Peripheral intelligence could be my endpoints. It could be the space I also am speaking to me, calling to me, response, being responsive. Mm. Peripheral intelligence and communication through the variable levels of touch. When contact is clear, communication is clear. Use of force is specific, and interplay becomes dynamic intraplay. The critical attentional action of responsibility. Activating presence as a practice, dancers can become dynamically and inseparably woven with their environments. Being flexible by changing the scale of motion, they learn to communicate as ecosystems, changing their organization within each moving moment. And I'd like to end with something lovely by Natasha Myers. And Natasha Myers has a text. Natasha Myers is an anthropologist who studies biological systems and the science that studies biological systems. And in this book of hers, Rendering Life Molecular, you can go to the next slide, please, Leanne. Oh, hang on, this is broad. I want to go back to this in an important sense, in a breathtakingly intimate sense. Touching, sensing is what matter does, or rather what matter is. Matter is condensations of responsibility. Touching is a matter of response. Each of us is constituted in responsibility, meaning all those non-human bits are acting in response with responsibility, as responsible. Each of us, meaning me, is constituted as responsible for the other as the other. So I am this whole form that is already functioning in responsibility. Now the job is take that outwardly. Yeah? Okay. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so before you read that, oh yes, okay, hang on. No, this is from this text that I show you, right? Why is it so difficult to use off-the-shelf software? She's in conversation with a guy who is a crystallographer. And don't ask me what crystallography means, but it's it is a way of studying. His crystallography is about proteins. He's a protein crystallographer. So he's studying protein molecules. Why is this so difficult to use off-the-shelf software to predict how proteins might bind or dock with one another? And Edward, the crystallographer, explained that these tools don't work well for large molecules like proteins because proteins are breathing entities. I interrupt him. I didn't think I heard him right. Did you say proteins are breathing? Yes, breathing entities, he responded, adding, I don't know, sounds a bit romantic, doesn't it? Where the model on screen remained static, he relayed the qualities of his breathing molecule by wrapping his hands around an invisible pulsing sphere. Now I want to read from further on in the book. He says, indeed, it is by paying attention to the affective entanglements of scientific inquiry, meaning affective. That means the immaterial aspect, the feeling, the touching aspects of entanglements of scientific inquiry, that this book is able to amplify protein modelers' otherwise muted views about the affectivity of matter. In their hands, protein molecules breathe. Expert practitioners can tell when proteins are happy, stressed, in pain, under strain, or relaxed, when they are behaving and when they are misbehaving. If living substance is for them at least partially reducible to mechanical principles, it is also simultaneously lively, wily and unruly. It is by observing how modelers perform their molecular knowledge through gestures, stories, and animate renderings that the mechanistic theories of matter they adhere to in their scientific texts can be seen to give way to livelier ontologies. This book thus reveals forms of animacy immanent to mechanistic logics. Modelers' invocations of the excitable life of matter offer up novel views of the sciences of life with the promise that the biosciences today are more and other than what we may have long anticipated. Okay, and that's where I'm ending this. It wouldn't surprise me if slowly but surely we end up seeing that there is a world that is far more lively than any of us anticipate. And dancers were at the forefront of that. That's our work. Okay, let's open up and have a open conversation about all of this. I wanted to be a provocateur. I hope I have provoked you. And let's go. Have at it. Anybody can speak.
I would say, Nita, I'm in a different phase of thought. The overall everything that almost everything was about the first phrase of if we are talking about we are mentioning Buddhism, it was empty. Form is emptiness, which means there is a below blah blah blah, but form is emptiness. It's more like obtaining the rings. But then the second part of this phrase is saying, but the emptiness is form, in fact, which means it's always concrete, it's always super active right now, and it cannot be anything. We cannot live without boundaries in a way.
Exactly, and there is the conundrum. This is the conundrum. But if we only work with half of that equation and not the initial half, we miss so much. So it's not that I'm saying live without boundaries. Of course, I'm not saying that. But I am saying also, and alongside and within that, experience that which is boundless. So you know, I very often like to use the image of a canvas. And in this canvas, there is a canvas, right? And a picture is on the canvas. The canvas has been, if the canvas were not gessoed white or black or something that would allow the paint to show. If you put red paint on already red canvas, the paint's not going to show. The mark is not going to appear. A canvas, the canvas for dance is stillness. When I dance, I'm always experiencing stillness. I just did this like really deep meditation yesterday on stillness. In motion, still motion. Motion only appears because of stillness. And you can, if you move understanding stillness that is present, then all of a sudden you're now in a new territory of motion. So this is what I'm saying about beingness and about form as well. And about playing on all those scales of form. Not only being boundless, but offering all the scales. Not limiting yourself to the human only scale of being. Because, in fact, you are non-human. Let those aspects of being resonate with the world that also is non-human. Did that just make sense maybe, Alex? I hope so, because I love what you just said.
It makes sense, but at the same time, I would again pose the opposite, because
Yeah.
What it was said, human is created only from non-human. That's the part of where a lot of guys, starting from Plato and then Marx, stated it really well. Like, without an intention and doing something, there is no something as a name. So human is is created as an idea of human. And
Yes, it
sure
is.
thing, it's created out of the rest, but thinking table without use it as a table, trying to see myself as a human and not moleculars and all these. Definitely, that's for sure.
So, okay. I'm going to be quiet right now and let others speak, because others might want to answer you, not just me, and play with this whole um um I what I'm advocating is not one over the other, but both. Right? And basically
Yeah,
saying
that's
the thinking of one over the other is what's gotten us into this mess. Not enough of the first part of the equation. We can't think without creating distinction and boundaries. Thinking is creating distinction. And thinking is a blessing. But there's more. And it's the more that the rest of the body can do. The rest of the body mind. So anybody else, jump in, dig in, play with each other, play with me.
Nita.
Hey. Hi, Joe.
Hey. I think for me, as I listen to this amazing lecture, I'm struck by the fact that we all have different definitions of all these terms that we're using.
Yes.
You know? And it's informed by vast life experiences. And we can never be sure that we're actually talking about the same thing at all. I mean, that's what occurs to me at times. I was a philosophy major in college, and I began to think, how do I know that what my professor is defining as knowing, or a myriad of other words, how do we know that my definition and yours are the same? Because we're making that assumption, right?
And also too, there's the dancer's problem. I tell you to do this with, and have this kind of experience, or you explain your experience. I can't, I'm not that. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Is our color the same color when we speak of yellow or red?
Right.
So we can't know. It seems to me we can provoke each other.
Right.
Alex just provoked me. I love it. Thank you. I do adore it. And thank you for that provocation, Joe. Nicole.
I have a question kind of along the lines of what Joanna just brought up, which is around the ways that this kind of knowing and attention can serve an ethics, as you and I were talking about the other day, like an ethics in
Right.
dance. And I really love how this kind of work can kind of underpin or support like what a lot of people are talking about around consent practices, and that sometimes this language is even better because as soon as you say the word consent, like everyone's gets tense. Um, but I guess my question, like around this, you know, kind of everyone having their own perception, is like, if you're teaching attention practices in dance, in contact, through touch, it feels like it could be so easy for some people to really think they're doing it, the attention thing, and not really be doing it. And so how do you perceive that and address that in teaching?
Oh, I love what a practical question you bring up, and I think it's important. One of the things I think is critical is to train us to be able to see attention at work. So when I watch people dance, I'm watching attention. I do not get stopped with the body. I do not believe I can only see body. I can see or the material. I also notice that I can very easily see the immaterial through the material. The material guides me right there. And that guidance helps me understand when somebody is, and let me say it also, if you're dancing with somebody, you can feel it. You can feel their attention when it penetrates through you and when it is only on the surface. When they are treating you like an object, or when they get the being that is there. When they are moving as you, or when they are moving on a piece of equipment that they believe you are. Those things totally change the experience. And how do you do that? A part of it is by believing in attention more, maybe believing that it is present in touch and it is present in sight. I know less about attention in sound, but I'm sure it's present there. I just don't have those skills trained to recognize it so much yet. Hey, Glenna.
Nita, thanks so much. This is just very evocative and provocative. I think what you said about stillness really resonated with me in terms of one issue I know about my own, when I'll speak for myself, when I feel I'm coming up against a boundary, is that I'm not giving myself time to go, for example, from listening to really hearing, from touching to being touched back, from moving to feeling like I am moved, you know, coming into sort of relational reciprocity with something else.
Right.
So that then I end up with my motor mind taking over. Do more of this, more of that. Oh, I'm not moving enough. Oh, I'm not, you know, whatever the issue is. And I was really caught by your comment about stillness and feeling that is, if the brain is an organ of prediction and reaction, which is what I tend to think of it as, you know, largely, and that we are really, one of our response abilities is to come into a window of presence, that the presence has to happen in a place where we just make that interval to allow for a deeper level of dimensionality and understanding.
Right. I think so. I want to call everyone to notice that Glenna wrote the book on attention, by the way. And so I think if you don't know this book, what is it called? Body and Mind in Motion.
Body and Mind in Motion, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not only about attention, but it questions it.
It questions attention, certainly. It looks at the embodiment of attention, which is really quite a wonderful thing for any of you that are interested. It's a great book. I agree that responsibility of taking the time to be more than just this this material, individuated material actor, so that we can feel the call and the send of our engagement with the world, the touch, so that we actually can be touched. I think is critical. And the only way to get to those levels, they are more subtle than the merely material. And to allow for a world that has much more resonant vitality brings us alive. It means that enhances life. Do we think we're all alive to the same degree? No, actually not. Some people actually have a sense of vitality that is greater than others in some ways, in different directions. We're not the same. And as Nicole was pointing out, and I don't know if I got all of what you wanted to say, Nicole, because I think there's so much there in what Nicole was saying. So much that needs to be attended to. Actually, there's so much there in what each one of you is bringing up, that to take the time is something. I think that this realm is a dance realm. It is where dancers can offer the world so much more. Because culture has driven the immaterial out of the value of life, the resonant aspects of being. Wow, you're all thinking so hard, and it's great. Go ahead, anybody want to raise anything? Go for it, Joe.
Well, there are two of us. I think the other Joanna here raised her hand before me.
Oh, Joanna, where are you? There, go for it. I'm sorry, I don't know how to look at computer hand raising.
Thanks, Joe. Joanna. Yeah, I guess I think just because of the conversation I've spent all day having with when I was at work, it's now kind of fusing with this one. And I guess I spent the day listening to a bloke who grew up in a really rough part of Glasgow, talking about quite extreme violence experience, things like that. And that was under Thatcher. And I guess I feel like in some ways that reality and this reality we're talking about here, they seem so far apart. And so when, like, I mean, I feel like I'm just, because like we say that dance can offer the world, or contact can offer the world, and this type of attention and touch can offer the world. I guess I feel like it can offer certain parts of the world, because I feel like to come into contact from those kind of experiences, I feel there's so many potential barriers to each, like just I'm not going to find certain people in the contact jam that I go to, or rocking up to the contact classes I go to. And I guess that has been something that's been on my mind, and I don't really go past just noticing it, really. But I feel like there's such a potential in the way you particularly have described some of what I've understood of what you're saying, because some of it I haven't understood.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
There's a real potential for lots of things that could really be of benefit, but they seem like the worlds are so far apart.
The world is so far apart, and there are. I had a conversation with Nicole Bindler about this, and how important it is to recognize that not all people get to work at this scale or get to experience the world on these scales. Not all people get to dance. And dancing is a right, a human right. It's not a privilege to dance. So you're making a distinction between a privilege and a right. There are lots of human rights right now all over the world that are being, either because of culture or because of circumstances, circumstance of war in Ukraine, which the material world will call us out to be to act. And human rights are diminished. There are other places where rights are called privileges so that they can be taken. So I'm going to let Nicole say something about this because she's brilliant on that level. Go for it.
I think Joanna Shaw is unmuted. If you don't mind muting, just because there's some like ambient. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate what Joanna Kinsella just brought up a lot. I actually was just listening to a lecture by Gabor Mate last night and thinking a lot about how trauma is a huge barrier to being alive fully, and that of course trauma is distributed really unevenly throughout the world and disproportionately impacts people who are poor and have other marginalized identities. And I think that not everybody also culturally would want to do contact improvisation, but I do like the idea of some of the principles that Nita's putting forward as transferable to other kinds of connections, whether it's like simply body work or like holding hands or like even just like sitting across from somebody and making eye contact and being with them. So I do really appreciate how these tools and ideas can be transferable, and that like, yeah, my wish is that everyone has the capacity and the space to be able to attend to themselves and others and to experience connection. And I know like, yeah, people who work in social work also are like, or activists are exposed a lot to people who don't have access. Like I do volunteering for a community bail fund and speak with people who are incarcerated. And, in an incarceration, like you are completely dehumanized and you're trapped in a cell, and like there's going to be a lot of dissociation that needs to happen in order to be able to survive in imprisonment. So I do think that like this kind of work is something that, yeah, like could be considered a privilege because not everybody gets to do it, but that actually like I do think it's a human right, in that as much as one would want to step into an attention and presence practice, that they should have that right.
Thank you. That was great, Nicole. Yeah. Joe, Shaw.
I just want, because I come to all of this from an interspecies perspective and as a dancer, not a seasoned contact dancer, but Nita and I have talked about the intersection of what I'm doing in the horse world. With horses, you really need to allow them blink time. And you can literally see them blinking when they're taking in information. And actually, it's true for us as well as humans. And there are filmmakers that actually think about when a character is blinking and allowing the audience to see that. And I think in dance, one of the problems for me in dance is that we have a huge desire to keep going, that we're very committed to motion constantly, and that actually seeing the stillness, which Nita was talking about, as an essential part of that conversation. And I don't think it's dormant stillness at all. I think it's an active stillness that's about listening and
Yes.
taking the time to absorb.
Yes. 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 Somebody else, Glenna, do you have your mute is not muted?
Oh, sorry.
We can hear that you're eating. Oh my God.
I think Nikki has a hand up as well.
Okay, great. Nikki, hi.
Hi there. Yeah, I was just listening, Joanna, what you were saying before about like real life implications. And something just came to mind from, I've just been on a 5-day 5 rhythms workshop with Andrew Holmes here in the UK. And landing home from that, I met up with my best friend a couple of days later, and an experience occurred that hasn't occurred previously. And I think it was out of the result of what had happened during the workshop, with so much focused attention and some with touch and some not. And we were just chatting and sitting on the sofa, and she has she's diagnosed with ADHD and has other neurodiversities across autism and dyslexia. She's really hypersensitive to touch. You know, if you're out walking, you know, if there's a cobweb or if a nettle or any particular touch, really, there are certain parts of her body that would just be like a no-go zone. And we were sat on the sofa, and she just actually asked me, she put her forearm out to me and asked me to like touch her arm. And it was a really big thing for her. And she allowed me to just gently, but not too gently, because she didn't want it really light, obviously, but she wanted me to actually touch her forearm. And that has took like a deepening friendship of 2 years and trust for that to be able to happen. And I could just suddenly see there's this whole world of opportunity of like the power of being able to, I don't know, support people with sort of like intolerances to some extent, and just wondering where that may lead for her, you know, sexually, relationship wise, all this intimacy, and who knows. But I just thought I'd share that with you.
I think, you know, I love this. In about 5 years back, when I was at teaching at Impulse Dance with Kirsten Kusmal, a week-long intensive called Intimacy with the Inhuman. Intimacy with the Inhuman, we also are. In that workshop, really thinking about the various ways we all come to touch and how significant the touch of not just the human world, but the touch of the non-human world is. And if we can amplify the value of those touches, because this woman is in touch with her world, she must pull the covers up over her at night. She is not without touch. And that touch is an intimate touch. So starting there, starting with the touch that is the non-human touch, and the value of that, not dismissing that, not throwing the world away, and only being present to human as touching, or animals, even the world of sentient beings. All of everything touches everything. And beginning there.
Thank you.
Yeah. I love what you said. Congratulations, Nikki. That's very exciting. I'm so glad that friendship is deepening. And I do think that you're right on about trauma. Right on.
Hi, Nita. I just wanted to say I have to go, but thank you so much for this talk. It's definitely provoking and inspiring.
Thank you, Rebecca, for being here. I appreciate it. Nice to see you.
Yeah, great to be here. Also, I wanted to ask, will the recording be available for us to return to?
Yeah, it'll be on Nita's new website beginning next week. And also last month's recording will also be up.
I'm so
Yay.
excited.
Yay.
Leanne is a huge blessing to me, guys, and to anyone that's interested in this work. Total blessing that this can be available. Well, guys, it's 10 minutes after 10. Anybody have anything pressing that you have to say? Shall we all go away? The next Breaking Bread will be happening on Thanksgiving Day. I hate to tell you, but in the morning. We have Thanksgiving in Alex on November 24th, the fourth Thursday of the month of February. February of November, fourth Thursday. So, and I will be actually, quote, in the UK being produced. The talk will be produced. So it's kind of a collaboration between Breaking Bread and what's the name of the group? I'm blanking on the name of the group that is hosting us. Do you know, Leanne?
Trip Space.
Trip Space. So you may get a Trip Space invitation next time. Okay. And then we won't have one in December. We will look to have one coming next winter in January. If you like these, if you think these are valuable. So I think you do, because that's what I'm hearing. So I want to thank you all really, really, really very much for being here. And from all over the world is quite extraordinary. And so if you need to leave, feel free to leave, and the rest of us can just end up hanging out, chatting and saying hi.